Enable.
Hello and welcome to this special series titled NEXTworking, Transforming Business Through Cloud, presented by Nutanix and CNBC TV18. In this two-part series, we will discuss and deliberate on the various aspects of cloud computing and understand how it has transformed businesses in diverse sectors, from BFSI to manufacturing, education to retail, by bringing about much-needed agility, efficiency and security in the way that they operate. The series is also a build-up to the .Next conference scheduled to be held in Mumbai on the 4th and 5th of October, where you will witness the power of cloud computing in action for a vast array of use cases. Well, let's begin our first episode with a deep dive on hybrid cloud and how it enables Indian corporates to push the boundaries of their business. To help us understand the nuances of the topic, we're joined by three panelists. Let me introduce you to them. Shankarsan Banerjee, CTO of projects at NSE. He likes to be called Shanky, so that's what we'll address him as. Also joining us is Mandar Marulkar, the Chief Digital Officer at KPIT. And of course, we are also joined by Dheeraj Pandey, Founder and CEO at Nutanix. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. We'll quickly go into the first question. Dheeraj, this is addressed to you. Let's start with what the cloud strategy actually means for Indian enterprises, looking at the different use cases in terms of small businesses, large businesses, or the mainstream and niche verticals. What's your view on this?
Yeah, if you think about the idea of digital transformation, it's really about how do you actually do more with less and do it at an agility, at a pace that the competitive landscape is really demanding for. Cloud is about digital derivative of computing. It's e-commerce and computing coming together, and the fact that you can do a lot of things in one click. So large corporations, they have massive operations around the country, around the world. They have people, they have machines, they have data, and they need to really adhere to laws of the land, and they have challenges of laws of physics. How do you really bring data to a large data center, whether it's owned or rented? And there's economics, laws of economics, what should be owned, what should be rented, what's predictable, what's elastic. All challenges of large organizations. Mid-size, I think there is basically very similar things, except that you're not as dispersed as your large counterparts. And the small ones that have no footprint at all, like startups, they just want to start digital. And over time, as they actually start to gain footprint, the question is, how do they bring back some things and keep some things in the cloud?
All right, so let me follow up that with a question on the classic build versus buy decision. When that used to happen, users who want more control, they would go with the private cloud, and users wanting more simplicity and optimizing costs, they used to go with the public cloud. So how does a hybrid cloud model kind of bridge that gap? Shanky, you want to take this answer?
So it used to be a challenge between control and public clouds being more convenient. Today it's also a cost question, because public clouds, given that they're purely rent models, the cost can become very variable. We want control over costs as well. So we've been putting things on the private cloud where we understand what the capacity is, and the capacity is not particularly variable. It's a bit like guest houses versus hotels. When you have a lot of people traveling to a location, you take a guest house. If you have undefined travel schedules, you take hotels. The hybrid cloud allows us to go from one to the other without too much thought. We can take the features, the control features, the cost management features of a private cloud, and then extend the elasticity into the public cloud. And that is really what's helping us. We've been doing this quite recently, but it seemed to work.
All right. And Mandar, what's been your experience in addressing this question of this build versus buy, and how the hybrid model kind of bridges that gap?
See, traditionally, for last many years, every organization is comfortable setting up an infrastructure on premise. So the logical journey is giving them the flexibility, scalability, and all advantages what the public cloud service providers offer into the on-premise infrastructure. And that is how the companies have really transformed from the traditional infrastructure to the private cloud. However, they also realize the pace of innovation, what is happening into the digital space, especially with the digital giants. in the platform area, different cognitive technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so many other areas. They do not want to reinvent everything, and they really wanted to take the advantage of some of the innovations into their applications and create the differentiators for the organization. And that is where what they are doing is integrating the part of the private cloud with the public cloud, either partially or fully. Where I am talking about fully means when we are talking about the infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. So in case of an infrastructure as a service, whenever you require to burst the application workloads in the public cloud, so that you can have a baseline infrastructure, and for the peak loads you can take it to the public cloud, and that is where the hybrid cloud really works.
That flexibility is what
that
works
flexibility really gives you the advantage.
Okay, and expanding on the what Mandar has mentioned about the pace of digital transformation, do you see India's digital ecosystem actually evolving faster than other parts of the world? And if so, what factors are driving selection of cloud platforms leaders?
That's a great question. In fact, just segueing into what both Mandar and Shanky said, had it not been for open source, cloud would be a very different discussion, because then innovation would be proprietary and you'd be stuck with one cloud provider versus the other. The fact that we've actually really gone and developed and matured open source in the last 10 years has given an advantage of portability. In the Indian government, for example, think about how they've done UIDI with a lot of an open source stack. I think that's not just true for Indian government, but a lot of enterprises are like, do I really want to be locked in into proprietary APIs, or do I want flexibility? Because over time, they'll drive each other's prices down, and I need to be able to move things around across different operating systems. Cloud is really an operating system. You can look at Windows, and you can look at Linux, you can look at Solaris, and many other operating systems in the last 10, 15, 20 years. The thing that enterprises learned from the Windows experience was that let's not get locked down into one operating system. So I think there's an immense boost and this freedom to think about, if I want to build something, let me use stuff that's portable. And Nutanix as a company has really been spearheading this to say, look, we want the freedom for people to build things and move things. We're getting into our own cloud business. We want people to we don't want to take sides about owning and renting, because these two things are here to coexist. As Shanky mentioned, the guest house versus hotel analogy, we actually call it the home versus hotel analogy. You're not going to rent a hotel for 5 years if you know you're going to live there. You're not going to do an Uber for 5 years if you know you need to commute from home to work every day.
Shanky, I want to pick your brain on one question on the fact that a multi-cloud environment, while it still affords agility to a lot of enterprises, the question then comes of consistency of infrastructure and maintaining control over it. So how can this be achieved in your view?
So firstly, most of the use cases we've seen, we don't actually use very specific cloud features because our applications are never that specific. I mean, there are startups that do, but most enterprises use relatively simple features. And all clouds offer slightly different variants, but they all offer those basic features. So it's more a management problem. How do you make sure that this particular feature, let's say, no SQL hosting, it's different in Amazon, it's different in Azure, it's different in this cloud and that cloud. How do you make sure that your NoSQL, nevertheless, the basic features can be moved from one to the other? And that has proved to be less challenging than we thought. Yes, it is nevertheless some work on our part.
So a software-defined approach is the way to go here, because then it kind of removes this hurdle that exists. Mandar, would you agree with that? Do you think we are moving towards a software-defined approach when it comes to cloud computing?
Absolutely. So KPIT, we are one of the very early adopters of software-defined infrastructure. So when we are talking about everything as a self-service model, so whether it is traditionally people who are doing only compute and network as a self-service model. However, we require the infrastructure for running the applications. So just having a virtualized application or a VM ready doesn't give you the self-service model. You require so many other components to be installed on top of the VM to make the application ready for the end user. And that is where we really talked about having an underlying completely software-defined infrastructure, and that is where the Nutanix, the enterprise cloud, really helped us.
All right. On that note, we'll take a short break, but there is lots more to discuss about the power of a hybrid cloud in transforming Indian businesses. So stay tuned to CNBC TV18. Welcome back to this special presentation titled NEXTworking, Transforming Business Through Cloud, presented by Nutanix and CNBC TV18. Right, let's dive right back into the discussion. What are some of the best practices when it comes to hybrid cloud that Indian enterprises can embrace, Mandar? What's your view on this?
Yeah, let me give the example that how we are really doing it into the automotive sector, because we work with the large tier 1 OEMs in the automotive sector, and when we talk about the autonomous driving or advanced driver assisted systems, typically whenever any decision needs to be taken, that decision is typically taken locally within the car. So exactly, if I come back to the IT systems, whatever are the local decisions to be taken, the private cloud, because of the latency issues, because of the local intelligence and the learning what you have into your enterprises, it is more suited to take the decisions in the private cloud. However, when you really wanted to work with the ecosystems, like taking the data onto the public cloud and sharing that data from the analytics perspective to the insurance companies, to the dealer network, you still require a public cloud. So when you really wanted to subscribe to the advanced services and get it interconnected with the rest of the world, you can work with the public cloud. And that is where the technology really now seamlessly allow you to integrate between the private cloud and the public clouds securely.
Okay, and Shanky, to reach that level itself is a big achievement for a lot of the companies, and especially when we look at the question of legacy infrastructure for a lot of the big enterprises. At least startups have that advantage that, you know, they have a blank slate to work on. But for a lot of these big enterprises who have legacy infrastructure and who are held hostage by it when they try to transform digitally, how do they kind of get out of that chakra view sort of which is formed? Because the cost equation will definitely be on the top of the minds for management, saying while we want to transform digitally, it's coming at a cost which we might find, you know, not suitable for us. How do they address that question?
So we identified two major issues. One is the adoption, because software defined everything requires you to change your application development behavior. But also the other challenge was the budgeting behavior. How do we accommodate it within our refresh cycles, and how do projects within the company budget for things? Projects used to budget for the entire hardware required for that budget for 5 years. If that is the case, you have very little scope to transform infrastructure because it's already budgeted and bought. So we had to persuade individual projects to budget only for the infrastructure they need today, and don't worry about it, it's going to come as soon as you need it. That budgeting change, we had to work with the CFO, we had to work with the project owners to make sure that that happened. There was some skepticism, we did some experiments. But today, for instance, we don't budget hardware by project. We budget hardware as a common pool, and projects get built as they require it later on. It's a bit of a thinking change, and it takes some time to absorb.
It takes some time. And as a provider, how do you kind of have your sales pitch fine-tuned? Because this is a question which a lot of customers will come to you with, saying, while I want to transform digitally, I am being held hostage by my infrastructure. What can you do to help me? So how does your sales pitch work to them, and how do you think they can address this question?
You know, I think we've thought a lot about this. Internally, we are digitally transforming ourselves. You know, we were an appliance company, we became a software company. That was digital 1.0 for us. Now we go becoming a service company as we host our own clouds. So we have our own timeless journey of digital transformation, you know. I say that digital is invisible, invisible is digital. So what Shanky just said, it's a thinking issue, is really a culture issue. Because technology, you don't lead with technology when you have to go and make transformations work. It's really about telling stories. You know, within the company, we talk about how did Netflix exploit and leverage infrastructure to disrupt distribution of movies, and now content as well. How did Google win over Yahoo? You know, it was about infrastructure. They had amazingly well-built infrastructure. They could crawl the web every day and go and index it better than Yahoo ever did. How is China really leapfrogging everybody else? Because of infrastructure. So at the core of any change is foundational infrastructure change. And that is the barometer for governance. You know, if you look at India, like one of the things we talk about, why is Bangalore really slowing down? It's because of lack of infrastructure.
What do you think can be done to encourage, say, BFSI and the manufacturing space to move mission-critical applications to the cloud? Mandar, what's your view on this?
See, I think that mindset is changing. Because here, when we are talking about a mission critical, what you really required is the availability, stability, and the performance of that application. And of course, in the back of the mind, the security is there. There are some challenges about the security, especially having access to the audit trails when you are keeping it on a public cloud and identifying on which specific server your information and data is residing. But if we can address that question separately, but from the performance and availability perspective, you get the public cloud as good as the private cloud. In fact, you get a better scalability and the flexibility. Another thing is, nowadays, when you are talking about a mission critical applications, you are re-looking at the systems architecture and you are developing primarily the cloud native applications. When you talk about the cloud native applications using the container technologies and using a lot of open source technologies, I will suggest that a lot of pace of innovation can be increased if you really develop it on a public cloud.
Okay. And in terms of concern, Shanky, the usual ones, I mean, there's data privacy, of course, a big concern. Then the loss of control over data and interoperability. How do you address all these questions when you meet your peers?
So there's some things about, I mean, there are regulations that we have to navigate, especially BFSI has a lot of regulation to navigate. Luckily, the cloud providers themselves are also recognizing this. For instance, the data locational regulations. So cloud providers have started providing physical data location guarantees. A lot of the security, a lot of the compliance, now the providers themselves provide that compliance report so that we don't have to go around and build our own layer of compliance. Okay. In terms of criticality, public clouds have actually become more reliable than most private enterprises. It's a bit like electricity. You know, there was a time when I was a child, electric grids in India used to be very unreliable. You had to have your own inverter. Especially if you were going to college and were preparing for entrance exams, inverters were your life. Supply. Today, I mean, at least in Bombay, nobody has inverters because the grid doesn't fail. And now, so that shift is happening even with cloud as an infrastructure. Okay. A proper infrastructure should be mission critical anyway. It doesn't matter whether it's public or private.
How do you embed security within this infrastructure layer so that, despite the data silos, it can work seamlessly across but how do you think that can be addressed?
Yeah, I think there's immense opportunities for innovation in there. This whole idea of distributed trust. Apple refused to give any private data to FBI, despite FBI's subpoenas and everything else. They said, look, this is a consumer's data. I can't, just because I'm a provider and I'm hosting their data, doesn't mean it's ours. So this whole idea of distributed trust, where around blockchains, around the fact that, I throw the keys over to the tenant.
Let everyone know what's going on rather than, keep that information restricted.
Yeah. And also the fact that one hack doesn't mean everybody. I mean, there's a whole power of social proof, the fact that everybody has to contribute and we know what's wrong, what's right, through a blockchain-like system, through a system that says, I don't even have the keys. It's the keys are with the tenant. So there's immense opportunities to innovate with the idea of I threw the keys to the tenant, I don't have it, don't ask me for the opening the lock, and blockchain and things like that, where security will actually get resolved.
All right, but Madar, behind the scenes, when there's always this battle between security teams and development teams in terms of, how do we make it low frictions? How do you think security can be made low friction between the security teams and development teams, in your opinion?
Absolutely. So what we do in KPIT, that we involve the security team in the architecture itself. So whenever we are talking about any application architecture, without looking into the security, really you will not be able to put the application in the production. So now when we are talking about the software defined infrastructure, the microsegmentation, the distributed firewalls that allow you to really put the locks across the containers and decide that these containers or these applications is supposed to talk only with 4 tenants. And that is where you can really put a granular policies on your workloads, ensuring that you get the security for those workloads.
All right. And before we wrap up, Shanky, your view on, do you see cloud computing playing a more important role now in the digital India vision that the government has? What do you think needs to be done?
Yes, I think the government is doing the absolute right thing in opening up. So open API initiatives that the government is doing, open data initiatives that the government is doing. It is also starting to encourage a lot of cloud adoption of government data in every service. So whether it's UIDAI data or regular government massage data, and governments all over the world have started doing this. And it seems to be very valuable, both as a message, but also as a sheer practical point.
On that note, we will wrap up this discussion, the first of a two-part series on the power of cloud computing and its transformative effect on Indian businesses. I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing with us their insights on the topic. And of course, thank you to our viewers for tuning in. Keep watching CNBC TV18.
Focus, ideate, innovate, enable.